Okay. It will come up hopefully pretty soon. Okay. I'll give you, some of this is probably a little bit of background and repeated. California has 515 groundwater basins. They're defined as alluvial basins in Bulletin 118. Vary significantly throughout the state, different precipitation, different demands, different geographic and geologic conditions. Groundwater use in California varies significantly as well. I'll catch up here. Different demands throughout the hydrologic regions. It accounts for 35 to 46% of the water supply based on the 2013 groundwater update, depending upon a wet or a dry year. About 75% of the groundwater use is for ag, and about 22% is for urban, and the rest is for managed wetlands. Groundwater is about 16.5 million acre feet for per year over the average from 2005 to 2010. Groundwater is managed differently than surface water. Groundwater law or California water law and management, surface waters are managed under a permitting system, and groundwater is regulated at the local level through adopted groundwater management plans, local ordinances, or litigation. And the state encourages groundwater management and local water management. Legislation for groundwater management is nothing new. There's legislation that went in as early as 1992. There's AB 3030 was the first groundwater management plan. There's been updates. Local groundwater assistant grants came in 2002, and there's 9 cycles of that. In 2002 also was SB 1938, where it identified required elements in a groundwater management plan as well as recommended elements, and it made getting funding for grants reliant on having a groundwater management plan. In 2009, as part of the California Water Package, SB 76 was passed, and it became what we call CASGEM, California Statewide Groundwater Elevation Monitoring Program. And that required statewide seasonal and long-term groundwater elevation monitoring statewide. And it's working with local agencies. I'll get into a little bit more detail on that. And in 2011, there was an amendment to the CASGEM program to allow modified groundwater elevation monitoring for certain conditions. As I say, groundwater management is managed at the local level either through an adopted groundwater management plan, court-adjudicated basin, or local ordinances or joint power agreement. And I'll go briefly over this. Why is groundwater data important? Groundwater, because it provides so much of a water supply, it's critical. We need to evaluate levels and trends. We need to identify where recharge areas are. We need to find out where pumping or discharge areas are going on and how that interacts. We need to track groundwater storage changes over time. We want the elevations of the conditions of the basin. We need to understand the hydraulics and connectivity, surface water and groundwater, as well as within the basin. And it's used to address impacts. As Michelle said, subsidence is a huge issue in some areas, but there can also be saline intrusion, seawater intrusion, overdraft, etc. So what information do we need to be able to monitor the basins, and what's really critical to be monitoring? So basic, fundamental, bottom line information we need groundwater levels. You need flow directions to find out where things are going in there. You need to get a trend analysis. A couple points doesn't tell you the trend. You also don't know where you are historically, where that level is, so you need long and short term. It'll also fluctuate seasonally and long term. You want to look at the groundwater storage calculation. How is groundwater storage increasing or decreasing, or is it stable? You want to get a water balance for groundwater budgets, what's going in, what's recharge, annual. And you also want information off of well logs. Is there continued drilling? Where are they set? What aquifers, etc. Most of that information I just went over would be coming from the local level, that information. Additional groundwater information that you'd want to be able to get a better understanding of what's going on in groundwater, annual groundwater reports. So if you've got a groundwater management plan, then assessing that basin, how is it doing over the year. Reports on conjunctive management projects. What's going in, what's the efficiency, how much you're putting in, what are you taking out. Identifying groundwater recharge zones, and those are really critical so that things don't get covered. You want to be able to make sure that we have that recharge areas to the groundwater. You also want to be looking at assessment of adverse conditions, subsidence, saltwater intrusion, if you're along the coast, seawater barriers and things like that. Unfortunately, if you have some of these adverse conditions, they can be permanent or difficult to address, so you really want to try and get in the prevention mode. And what else we've done, and then under CASGEM we'll get into a little bit in a few minutes, we prioritized the California groundwater basins, and we did that according to what was in the water code under the CASGEM program. And we've also updated the inventory of groundwater management plans, and that was done under the groundwater enhancements from the California Water Plan Update 2013. So the importance of groundwater information and kind of the connection to Bulletin 118, as Kayvon had said, Bulletin 118 hasn't been updated since 2003. It's been one of those things that we've been told to update, but it's not one of those activities that DWR has not been funded to do. But Bulletin 118 also provides some information that doesn't necessarily need, that would stay constant. It provides a standard framework. It defines the groundwater basins, so we're all talking from a common entity. It also has information on basin descriptions, physical setting, properties. The degree of information on that varies depending upon the basin. In some basins there's a lot of information, it's well known. Other basins, small, remote, don't have a whole lot, things in between. It also provides basic information on groundwater, how groundwater is managed, and how it works and operates, the science of it. So in the California Water Action Plan that the governor released last month, I guess it was last month, groundwater falls under action item number 6, and that's expand water storage capacity, improve groundwater management. And under those are a couple of bullet items that affect groundwater directly, one of which is provide essential data to enable a sustainable groundwater management, and it's to expand and fund CASGEM. And there is some funding in fiscal year 14-15 in the governor's budget right now to continue with CASGEM. We'll see how the budget process goes, but right now there is. And it also, another item for groundwater is to update Bulletin 118, and Bulletin 118 California's groundwater. It also was asking for a systematic evaluation of major groundwater basins. There is no funding in the upcoming fiscal year for updating Bulletin 118, and as I said, we haven't had funding for Bulletin 118 since it was finished back in 2003. So understanding that and understanding groundwater is critical, and there's different programs within the department. DWR has been trying to combine and collaborate and leverage efforts under groundwater so that we can move understanding of the groundwater forward. And so we've taken the CASGEM program and the California Water Plan Update 2013 and worked together to build upon it. We've advanced statewide understanding of groundwater using these efforts, and I'll show you some examples of some of the work that's been done over the last couple of years. But clearly more work is needed. We've done what we can, but clearly there's more. So under CASGEM, it's a voluntary program. The state's working with local agencies to monitor and become monitoring entities. It's the first statewide program for groundwater elevations. It makes the data readily and widely available to the public, and we report back that information, and it also requires DWR to do other work like prioritize the groundwater basins, conduct groundwater basin assessments, and provide status reports to the legislature. The CASGEM data augments the information and groundwater work that's in other DWR programs. Here's some stats on what we've done. One of the biggest things, probably one of the benefits of CASGEM, is we've added over 3,700 CASGEM wells into the water data library that we wouldn't have had before. And we have over 100,000 groundwater elevation records. Some of those are historical records that agencies, when they became CASGEM monitoring entities, they added their historical data for those wells. So we've got a much longer time period. There are 71 designated monitoring entities, unique agencies that are working as monitoring entities throughout the state. You have a question? No? Okay. Too far. So as one of the things we were required to do is to prioritize the basins. And so here's a map showing you where it is. We're in the process of trying to finalize that. Comments were due on Monday, the final comments. We did workshops in January. And as you can see, the areas in orange are the high priority. The kind of yellow, although it looks kind of more greenish on the screen, are medium. And the light and the dark green are low and very low. And numbers out of there, we end up with 46 high priority basins and 80 medium priority basins, 126 total, which are about 25% of the groundwater basins. The remaining ones, 75%, are low or very low. And of those high and medium priority basins, that covers 92% of the groundwater use overlying the groundwater basins and 89% of the population overlie. So we figure we did a pretty good job of trying to capture where groundwater is being used and what it's being used for. The prioritization covers 8 criteria, but it's predominantly, or it measures more on groundwater reliance. And our prioritization does not reflect groundwater management, so it's based on the criteria that's in there. It's not a reflection is the basin managed well or not well. So how will we use this prioritization? With 515 basins, we need to figure out where we're going to start. It's too much to get through everything. So, and it also sets up the prioritization statewide on a statewide scale. So a high priority basin under CASGEM could be very high priority within the local context, but in the local context, if you got a basin that's very reliant on groundwater, may not be a high priority basin. It could diminish. It does not diminish the local amount of it. So we're also going to be looking at the high and medium priority basins to work through them first to allocate resources. It also gives us a common understanding of the groundwater basins, and we're using the same prioritization in the California Water Plan. And it will also allow us to, we might be able to be using that to go through if we're looking at groundwater management plans and informed decision making. Next steps for CASGEM is to finalize the prioritization and look at which basins are the high and medium basins that are designated. And here's some numbers on how many are designated and partially under there. And future efforts for CASGEM starting from next fiscal year, we want to continue with the designation of the areas that are not designated. We want to evaluate the extent of groundwater monitoring. We want to identify regional trends, identify the basins subject to overdraft, and start conducting groundwater basin assessments. We also want to update the Bulletin 118 boundaries. There are some areas where work has been done, and the boundaries that are set up in Bulletin 118 are different, so we need to talk to the locals, and we want to finalize that. Some of the efforts that CASGEM has provided more data for and that the water plan has been working on, here's a statewide groundwater level change. These are changes of 25 feet, and so it's from spring of 2012 to spring of 2013. Without CASGEM, we weren't able to do some of that, but there's significant drops in the groundwater statewide. California Water Plan did a lot of groundwater updates. They did descriptions. They are looking at groundwater conditions, change in storage, looked at hydrographs, land subsidence, and others, and did an inventory of the groundwater management plans and assessed them. Here's an example of the Tulare Lake, and tried to get hydrographs that would depict the area, and showing here there's 5 different parts of the basin react differently. There's some recharge areas. There's some other areas where there's declining groundwater levels. Other ones where it's fluctuating back and forth. So one hydrograph doesn't explain it, and the water plan also has regional reports to give information on the regional scale. Another thing that was new to the California Water Plan is the change in storage, and in this it was done for the Central Valley, the entire Central Valley, and it came up using different coefficients from 0.7 to 1.7. It's a total of 5.4 to 13.2 million acre feet over the 5-year period of 2005 to 2010 in the Central Valley. So a huge drop in change in groundwater storage. And we wouldn't have been able to do this without the water plan update, and also using, we'll be able to do better analysis and refinements with the CASGEM data. Subsidence that Michelle went over obviously was another thing that was identified and brought up. So there's key messages from the water plan. being such a dominant point of the water resources, the supply, it's critical to take care of it. Extraction varies significantly throughout the state depending upon what's going on. Back in 1980, there were 11 basins that were subject to critical overdraft. We've not updated that, even though a lot of areas still continue to show signs of depletion. There's been renewed land subsidence. Another important, only 17% of the Bulletin 118 basins covered by groundwater management plans covered all the SB 1938 requirements in the groundwater management plans. Although significant efforts have been made and we've been finding more stuff, more work, and as our director Mark Cowan said, bold actions are needed for groundwater. The recommendations for groundwater in the water plan, which ties into where we're going with groundwater, we want to continue, we need to promote public education. People don't always understand where their water comes from, and drawing down and pumping more can exacerbate things. A better understanding, improve the understanding of the groundwater basins. And we want to improve collaboration and coordination so that we can get information and build on it, that we're not duplication. We want to be able to have the sharing of the groundwater information and data. People oftentimes don't want to share, or agencies don't want to share groundwater information. It can be difficult to get it if you're trying to find out what's going on. We want to strengthen and expand and continue to sustain CASGEM. It's got a good start and it's going forward, but we want to continue with it. We want to look and assess the groundwater management plans against the criteria in SB 1938 and see where they are. We want to develop guidelines to promote better groundwater management plans and put that out there. And we also want to be developing tools for conjunctive water management and increase statewide groundwater storage areas. So actions to be able to do that, we want to advance integrated water management. We don't want transferring of problems from one area, one region to the next door region. We want locals in the local areas or the regionals to step up and take responsibility and work together on their water management issues. Things can be managed best when they're working together at the local level you're there. IRWM plans should also address risk appropriately, in addressing the whole part of it. Sometimes groundwater is not always looked at. And we want to be developing standards for a sustainable groundwater resource. We're too reliant on this resource to not have that. There should be legislation considered to provide additional authority, or that authority needed for some local agencies to step up and be able to put in controls or stop pumping or whatever. I think some of them they feel they don't have that authority. So if everyone's getting along and taking care of it, it works fine. But when people start to put too much in, pumping too far, how does it stop? And convening interagency committee that we can work together and work forward. So in closing, we look forward to continue to implement these actions, and we want to point out also funding is needed at the state and local level to address groundwater management issues. We've gotten some, but there's more to do, and the locals need it as well.
Mary, thank you very much. Eric?
Hello, Commissioners.